Let's return to our top story, and it's been revealed the man providing rent-free accommodation to Barnaby Joyce is benefiting from one of the Deputy Prime Minister's projects, the relocation of the Australian Pests and Veterinary Medicines Authority.
Well, to discuss this and more of the week's top stories, we're joined now by Federal Liberal MP Jason Falinski and Labor's Pat Conroy. Thanks both for coming in. Unsurprisingly, Jason Falinski, I'll start with you. Is the relationship between Malcolm Turnbull, the Prime Minister, and his deputy on the edge? Is it nearing collapse?
No, not at all. I mean, what we saw on Thursday afternoon is the Prime Minister say what I think most Australians probably would have expected was the case already, which is that if you have someone who has a direct reporting line to you, you shouldn't be in a relationship with that person. That, by the way, is the standard across most Australian companies, most law firms in Australia, and anyone who's worked for a US or UK-based company would know that. I think Barnaby's response, a lot of people forget that just because you get elected to Parliament doesn't mean you stop being a human being. And over the last 6 months, he's had citizenship woes, he's had his by-election family breakdown, and obviously he's had death threats against him, and a person was charged with that just this week. So he's had a pretty stressful period of time, and I think we all have to give him some room to express that.
But he hasn't just defended himself. He's gone on the attack, calling the Prime Minister inept.
Yeah, well, no, he called the comments.
The comments he made.
Yeah.
Inept.
But look...
But what's the effect of that, and how can they possibly work together from now on?
Well, look, the coalition is like a family, and like any family, from time to time there are blow-ups and people say things that they later regret. I don't think that there's anyone in the coalition who doesn't believe that Barnaby needs to be given some leniency at this point, or some room and
or time
off, and I think the week off will be good for him.
So you expect him to come back as leader?
I do, yes.
You don't think that the relationship between the two is irreparable?
Well, no. As I say, it's like a family. From time to time, I don't know about your brothers and sisters, but they've said things to me that have been outrageous, Andrew.
But not
I've still got
and not as you don't run the nation. You are not the Deputy Prime Minister.
This is true. There is a difference that when you're in this position, what you say is public, but this is not irreparable by any stretch of the imagination. These guys will continue to work together for the good of the country.
Pat Conroy, is Jason right? Politicians are human beings. Should we be cutting Barnaby some slack here?
Well, it's a valiant defence by Jason of the indefensible, because the fact is we have a Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister who cannot survive together. Let's just reflect on the last 48 hours. The Prime Minister said his Deputy Prime Minister showed an appalling lack of judgment, so much so he couldn't trust him to be acting Prime Minister when he went overseas next week. In return, in a quite carefully orchestrated move, the Deputy Prime Minister called the Prime Minister inept. How can this go on? This is clearly a soap opera, and this isn't a family matter, with due respect, Jason. This is the government of a nation of 24 million people managing $1 trillion economy, and how can we have the two most senior figures at loggerheads? It's embarrassing, it's a joke, and it needs to be resolved.
Pat, beyond the optics of it, of that working relationship between the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, do you feel as though Barnaby Joyce does have more to answer as far as his relationship with Vicky Campion, and when she became technically his partner, and her relocation to another office?
Well, there are massive questions to answer, and I think the greatest indication of that was the Prime Minister Turnbull on Thursday saying that Barnaby needed to consider his position. That is code for saying, I need you to resign, and Barnaby hasn't respected that. There's been a clear breach of the Ministerial Code of Conduct around seeking personal gifts, if we believe the account of Barnaby's business mate, who has been very adamant on the public record that Barnaby rang up and sought the accommodation. That's a clear breach of the Ministerial Code of Conduct. We've also got Barnaby admitting in question time, and Scott Morrison, that Barnaby authorised the movement of a staff member who he was sleeping with. Strip everything away, and I've got tremendous sympathy for Barnaby's family and even Miss Campion in his situation. How can you have the leader of the Nationals Party authorising the creation of positions in other offices for someone he was in a relationship with? That is a fundamental conflict of interest, and on those two counts, breaching the Ministerial Code of Conduct, authorising those positions, Barnaby clearly needs to resign, and that's what the Prime Minister was reflecting on Thursday.
Jason, if Barnaby doesn't resign, does that make the Prime Minister look weak? And if he does resign, does that put the coalition arrangement at risk?
So, Joe, I need to answer some of the things that Pat just said. The Labor Party has had almost 2 weeks now to point to a situation where, or any instance where Barnaby has breached the ministerial code of conduct. To date, under parliamentary privilege, they have failed to do so. It is wrong to say that the friend of Barnaby Joyce said that he asked him for a gift. Barnaby has explained the context of the conversation in which that occurred and that it was offered to him as a mate to a mate. Barnaby then declared that, and that has been there for everyone to see. Barnaby has had death threats against him by a person who has now been charged with that. The media has intruded into his life, making it easier for other people to find him and to also threaten his personal safety. This has not been an easy time for anyone, but the Labor Party's indulgence in gossip that is better suited for New Idea has been really appalling, especially in a week when we've had the Murray-Darling Basin plan fall over because the Labor Party's worried about 5,000 votes in Batman and have put that entire basin, its economy, its ecology and its environment in danger.
But Jason, just let's reflect on what happened on Thursday morning. Wednesday morning, Barnaby Joyce got up and said that it was Mr Maguire who rang him offering free accommodation. That directly contradicts what Mr Maguire has said to 2 different news organisations. That alone, if proven, is that Mr Joyce has misled Parliament. So we just have charge on top of charge on top of charge. And for Malcolm Turnbull to say, well, no case has been proven, he should actually be inquiring about this because this goes to his ministerial code of conduct. And to be in a situation where he says, well, unless someone proves cast iron beyond a shred of doubt that the ministerial code of conduct has been breached, I'm not going to do anything about that. That is a Pontius Pilate approach to this entire scenario, and it demonstrates a lack of leadership.
And indeed, if the position that you put forward were the case, it would be a serious one at that. However, the Prime Minister has made it clear on Thursday night that he has inquired of the Deputy Prime Minister. The Deputy Prime Minister has made it clear to him that he at all times adhered to the Ministerial Code of Conduct. There has been no evidence brought to the Parliament or to the Prime Minister that that is not the case. And the accounts of both Mr Joyce and his friend are consistent with each other.
They're not.
But
one
they
says that Barnaby rang him up
we
and
are
sought
now-
accommodation. The other says Mr Maguire rang him up. That's evidence of contradicting testimony right there.
Well, it's not, and it's not a significant or meaningful or material one at that.
Jason Falinski, did the Prime Minister overstep the mark in his criticism of Barnaby Joyce, which then, of course, prompted Barnaby Joyce to retaliate?
Well, look, I think the answer to that, Andrew, is no. The Prime Minister only reflected the remarks that Barnaby himself has reflected during the week. He has said that it's the greatest failure of his life was the breakdown of his marriage. But, I really question why we are still talking about this. If there's been a breach of the Ministerial Code of Conduct, let's talk about that. But there's been no evidence of that. We're talking about a marriage breakup. It's unfortunate. No one likes it when it happens, and no one wants to talk about it. Now, the fact that it's in the... And we've always had in this country a respect between the public lives of politicians and public figures and their private lives. That has been breached this week.
But this is moving beyond that now. This has become to an unworkable relationship between the Nationals and the Liberals.
Sorry, Andrew, with respect, that is a very serious breach of principle in the manner and form in which we cover politics and public discussion in Australia. And I think it's time that all of us took a beat and just wondered whether all of this has gone too far.
Jason Falinski, the optics of it, they're significant, and I return
Joe, we're
you
going
to
to talk
my
about
earlier question.
But are we going to talk about the optics, or are we going to talk about the actual things that have occurred
But
here?
certainly seeing Barnaby Joyce dig in as deputy leader, as the leader of the Nationals, has that not made Malcolm Turnbull look weak as a leader?
No. How has it done that?
Jason,
Your colleague, we just spoke to him, Senator Ian MacDonald,
yes,
essentially called for Barnaby Joyce to step aside.
I saw.
He said that's
Yes.
the only way that this can work.
Yeah.
You don't agree with that?
Well, that's not what I heard Ian say. That might be what you think he said or what he did say, but what I heard Ian say was for his own good he needed to
He said he needs to go to the back bench. That means he's no longer Deputy Prime Minister
Yes,
or
I
leader of the
understand.
National Party.
Thank you, Andrew,
let's ignore what Senator MacDonald said and let's reflect on what the Prime Minister said on Thursday. Malcolm Turnbull said Barnaby needs to reflect on his position. That is code in political circles for he needs to reflect on his position and resign. That is clearly what he was asking for, and we're in a situation where Malcolm or Barnaby has to go. because the Prime Minister has said that he needs to resign and he's too weak to sack him. He is too weak to sack him. Basically says it's up to the Nationals to sort this out.
Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, Kelly O'Dwyer, the list goes on, have all made it clear over the last 48 hours that it is not the role of the Liberal Party to intervene or interfere in National Party matters. He is the leader of the National Party, and where it is not up to us in the Liberal Party to determine who
But that just means that you're powerless
thinks.
to change this.
It doesn't mean that at all,
What does
Patrick.
reflect on your position mean to you? To me, it means that person needs to resign. What other interpretation could there be for Prime Minister Turnbull's words on Thursday afternoon? Barnaby needs to reflect on his position.
Unfortunately, we are running out of time. There are a couple of other issues we wanted to cover. Jason, you just mentioned it as far as the Murray-Darling plan is concerned. You said essentially Labor has reneged on this deal because of the Batman by-election playing to environmentalists essentially, and the Green vote. Is that the case, that you're trashing this deal?
Absolute rubbish. We flagged that we want to reach an agreement on this. The disallowance motion was an unfortunate step that we had to take for two reasons. First off, the fact that Barnaby Joyce has put into doubt, when he was the Water Minister, the 450 gigalitres of additional environmental water flows that was committed to as part of the deal. He undermined that in 2016. We've said if we can get a commitment, and the new Minister has indicated he's trying to do that, then that would open up this area for a solution. And the second one is getting serious about governance of this issue with these really disturbing accusations of water theft that came out of ABC Four Corners. I've got zero confidence in the New South Wales government doing anything about that. We had Barnaby Joyce, when he was Water Minister, in a pub in Shepparton, casting aspersions on the story, saying he's not worried about it effectively, that it's all a beat up to try and rip off irrigation communities. We've got serious questions about the governance, but we've signalled that if they can give us assurances about governance and that they can recommit to the 450 gigalitres, which they've already committed to previously, then we want to get this back on track. We don't take this lightly. We were in government when we signed up and developed the plan, and we want it to be back on track. But those are two key deal breakers, the 450 gigalitres and the water theft. Otherwise, billions of dollars of taxpayers' money is being wasted because a small minority of farmers are ripping off the Commonwealth.
The South Australian election is also on the horizon. Won't South Australians be worse off if this plan falls apart?
Well, we're trying to avoid the plan falling apart, but there's no point having a plan where billions of dollars of taxpayers' money is wasted because farmers are taking more water than they're entitled to, or we're not getting the true environmental outcomes because the 450 gigalitres isn't being delivered. So we're very conscious, and Tony Burke took an unusual step immediately after the disallowance motion succeeded. He went into the House of Reps and said, we're not bragging about this, I'm trying to work with the new Water Minister, I want to reach a solution and I'm confident we can. So we actually don't want to play politics with this, we want to find a solution.
Do you concede that
No,
politics is being played?
not.
It is politics,
It's
and the
absolute
deal is
politics.
broken?
Well, the Labor Party needs to come back to the table to solve that. Tony Burke's mea culpa in the House, and I happened to be sitting in the chamber at the time.
As was I.
Oh, I missed you. Sorry, Patrick. But was fantastic. But, you know, the fact of the matter is, this was what Pat has just said is these are complex issues and there's a lot of stuff going on. So what better way to look at this than a review? So Tony Burke, when he was Water Minister, initiated a review in 2011. It came back with its findings. The government is trying to implement those findings, and the Labor Party at the last minute in the Senate and Tony Burke got rolled by the left wing of his party because they're concerned about Batman, and so this now has put the whole thing in complete and absolute disarray. You've got state after state saying, well, including Daniel Andrews, saying, well, we may as well walk away from it. And as to the ABC Four Corners report into there's been water theft, etc., sure, there are always people trying to break the laws and break the rules. Doesn't mean you throw out the rules.
All right, as I said, we are running out of time. One more issue to deal with. Now, Jason, issues over your supposed dual citizenship. We'll get Pat's view on this from the Labor Party in a moment. They say it's an open and shut case.
Yep.
That they've been in touch with Polish authorities that show you are a dual citizen.
Yep.
Do you have any further update on that?
Yeah, sure. Look, I've got legal advice from academics, Polish law experts, from Australian law experts, including a former Solicitor General. They are all very clear that under Australian law, because of the way that Polish law operates, even if I were to be entitled to Polish citizenship, I would not have contravened Section 44(1). The Labor Party advice, which they procured to the Sydney Morning Herald, says that right in the middle. For the purposes of citizenship, the Polish government would not consider Mr. Flinski to be a citizen. That's what their own advice says. This was a non-story that is being beaten up because on their own side they have problems. And you know how I know Labor knows that I don't have an issue? Because sitting on their own backbench is Emma Hooser, the member for Lindsay, whose own grandparents were born in Poland and therefore would face, has none of the issues that I have about establishing Polish citizenship. And they know, because their own advice shows, that she did not violate Section 44(1) when she was elected because of Polish citizenship law. This is just such a non-issue because of the problems that they have on their side of the house.
Pat Jason was advised to get legal advice. He's done that. Do you accept it?
Well, what I accept is that there's a question mark over a few remaining members of Parliament on both sides, and we put forward a motion late last year that was supported by the entire crossbench, all crossbench, from Adam Bant to Bob Catt across the entire spectrum, saying let's refer these 10 members of Parliament that there are still issues with to the High Court to resolve it on a completely bipartisan basis. The government has refused to do that. They're threatening to send Labor Party members to the High Court, completely in breach of all parliamentary traditions where you don't have referrals that are on a partisan nature, and that's the most concerning thing here. We've offered a bipartisan approach to resolve this once and for all, because this has been an embarrassment and a slur on the Parliament for too long, and instead we have the government playing politics, trying to say, well, no, we're not going to refer to any of our members that independent experts have said there's question marks
I'm
on.
sorry, but I have to
Instead,
interrupt there.
we're just going to refer the Labor Party members.
That is just absolutely untrue.
No.
The Liberal Party has already dealt with 7
Please.
members of its own side.
Please.
5 of them went to the High Court.
They were
2 went
dragged
to a
kicking
vote.
and screaming.
Oh, okay. So
Dragged
now
kicking
you're
and
complaining
screaming.
about the manner and form in which
So-
they
so
went to the
Pat,
High
just
Court.
clarify.
You have not, under any condition, sent a single person besides David Feeney who submitted himself to it when he couldn't find his paperwork. Not one single member of the Labor
that's
Party
not-
has gone to the
Senator
High Court
Katie Gallagher
willing
as
it.
well.
And she was
She
dragged
referred
there
herself.
because she didn't have
No.
the numbers in the Senate to stop
That's
it.
right.
So should Jason be referred to the High Court?
Our position remains that all 10 members of Parliament that still have question marks about should be referred to the High Court.
Including Jason
in a
Felinsky.
bipartisan nature. So we can resolve it once and for all. We shouldn't play politics with this, where one side of Parliament
that's not what
only
you're
tries
doing.
to refer
No.
others. Just reflect on that for a minute as a policy principle. We could have the majority governing party referring members from the opposition to the High Court at will without any of their members.
Well, let us be very clear.
dagger in the heart of
Let
democracy.
us be very clear.
That
We
is
have
using
called,
the
we have
tyranny of
only
majority.
called upon you to do what we have done to 7 of our members who are on the thing. We are asking for Bill Shorten to show some real leadership and send those people on the Labor Party side with genuine cases to answer to the High
All
Court.
right, I think we're going round in circles now. Gentlemen, we
leave it.
are out of time. Jason Felinsky, Pat Conroy, thanks very much for your
Thanks
time.
for coming
My
in.
pleasure.
Thanks, guys.